Willie's morning ritual had remained unchanged for the past 7 years. The recycled air of Market Ring 7 always carried that same scorched smell, a combination of overheated circuitry and the charred residue from countless cooking stations. The constant mechanical hum of the Kessin space station's life support systems provided a familiar backdrop to his otherwise solitary existence. He cradled his steaming cup of tea, the only luxury he permitted himself these days. The synthetic blend wasn't nearly as good as Earth-grown varieties, but after so many years in deep space, even this artificial approximation had become a comfort. The heat, seeping through the cup's thin ceramic walls, provided more solace than the actual taste. Willie found his usual spot, a small alcove overlooking the market's central corridor. From here, he could observe without participating, watch without being watched. Perfect for a former translator who'd seen enough of the galaxy's various species to last several lifetimes. The station's public announcement system crackled to life. Reminder to all residents and visitors of Kessin Station: singing or musical performances are strictly prohibited in commercial areas, including Market Ring 7. Violators will face immediate detention and possible deportation. Kessin Station thanks you for your cooperation. Willie sighed. The no-singing law had been implemented 3 years ago, ostensibly to maintain peaceful commerce conditions. But everyone knew it was targeted primarily at the Lenari. Their physiological need to communicate through melodic tones had made them targets of discrimination throughout the sector. His gaze drifted across the market's diverse crowd. Humans mingling with orthids, Vespians, and a handful of other species that had established trade agreements with the Kessin administration. He noticed how the few Lenari present moved quickly, heads down, trying to be invisible. Their once vibrant cultural garments replaced by nondescript gray coveralls, standard issue for refugees on temporary status. The station's rigid regulations against alien distinctiveness had only worsened in recent months. Even the human merchants who'd previously welcomed all customers now seemed hesitant to engage with non-human species, particularly the Lenari. Their tall, willowy frames and silvery blue skin made them impossible to mistake for anything else. As Willie observed the morning rush, he noticed a small figure weaving through the crowd with unusual determination. A Lenari child. A girl, judging by the remnants of traditional beading in her hair. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 Earth years. What caught his attention wasn't just her solitary presence. Lenari children were rarely seen without adult supervision, but the intense focus with which she scanned the faces in the crowd. She was looking for someone. Willie shifted uncomfortably. Best to mind his own business. He'd learned long ago that curiosity about other species' affairs rarely led to anything good, especially now, with the station's increasing hostility toward aliens, particularly those who stood out. He took another sip of his tea and tried to focus on the newsfeed projected on his personal tablet. Something about mining disputes in the Kessler Belt. Nothing that concerned him anymore, not since he'd retired from diplomatic service. A small tug on his sleeve jolted him from his thoughts. The Lenari girl stood before him, her large, iridescent eyes blinking rapidly, a sign of anxiety in her species. Up close, Willie could see the toll that station life had taken on her. Her silvery skin had a dull, almost ashen quality, and the traditional beads in her hair, normally vibrant with color, had faded to a lifeless gray. "Human, are you single?" she asked bluntly, in heavily accented standard English. Willie nearly choked on his tea. "Excuse me? Single? You are?" The girl's grammar struggled with the inverted question structure. "Alone living?" Well, yes, but..." She grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "Come, my mom. Really kind. You have to marry her." Willie gently disengaged his hand. "Listen, little one, I don't think..." "Please." Her voice dropped to a whisper. She hungry. 4 days. The words hit Willie like a physical blow. He glanced around nervously, suddenly aware that their interaction might be drawing attention. Public displays of interspecies familiarity were frowned upon, especially with Lenari. "Where is your mother now?" he asked quietly. The girl pointed toward the far end of the market, to a shadowy corner, where the lighting had failed months ago, and the station maintenance crew had never bothered to repair it. "There, hiding." Willie hesitated. Getting involved with the problems of others, especially non-humans, was exactly what he'd promised himself he wouldn't do anymore. Not after what happened on Proxima Station. Not after the Translator Corps had discharged him for excessive emotional investment in diplomatic subjects. But the desperation in the child's eyes cut through his defenses. "What's your name?" he asked. "Leary," she replied, her voice lilting slightly on the R sound, a subtle remnant of the Lenari's natural musical speech patterns. "All right, Leary, I'm not going to marry your mother." He saw her face fall and quickly added, "But I can bring you both some food. Wait here." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you, human. My name is Willie." "Thank you, Will Lie." She pronounced each syllable carefully, as if testing unfamiliar terrain. Willie moved through the market stalls with purpose, purchasing a container of hot soup, some protein-dense bread, and 2 supplemental nutrition packets specifically formulated for Lenari physiology. He added another cup of tea to his order, ignoring the vendor's raised eyebrow at the unusual combination of items. When he returned to the alcove, Leary was waiting exactly where he'd left her, though her posture had become more rigid. A station security drone hovered nearby, its scanning beam sweeping methodically across the crowd. "Act normal," Willie muttered, handing her his own half-finished tea. "Pretend you're with me." Leary took the cup with both hands, her slender fingers wrapping around it as if it were something precious. The drone's scan passed over them and continued on. "Now, show me to your mother. Discreetly." Leary nodded and began walking. Not too fast, not too slow. Willie followed at a measured pace, maintaining enough distance to appear unconnected, but close enough to intervene if necessary. They wound through increasingly narrow corridors, moving away from the main market into the neglected peripheral zones of Ring 7. The ambient temperature dropped noticeably, and the lighting grew dimmer. Condensation dripped from exposed pipes overhead, a clear sign of poor maintenance. Finally, Leary stopped before what appeared to be an abandoned storage compartment. The access panel had been carefully manipulated to give the appearance of being locked while actually allowing entry. "Mom inside," Leary whispered, then made a soft, trilling sound, barely audible but distinctly Lenari. The door slid open just enough to admit them. The interior was dark, save for the faint blue glow of an emergency light strip. The space was small, perhaps 3 meters square, with nothing but a few tattered thermal blankets arranged in one corner. The air was stale and cold. As Willie's eyes adjusted to the dimness, he saw her, a Lenari woman sitting perfectly still against the far wall. Her posture was one of complete defeat, shoulders hunched, head bowed, like her daughter. Her skin had lost its characteristic luster, appearing almost gray in the pale blue light. "Mom," Leary said softly, reverting to her native language. The sound was like gentle wind chimes. "I brought help. A human. He has food." The woman didn't respond, didn't even look up. Willie crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "Hello," he said, placing the container of soup and other items on the floor between them. "I'm Willie. Your daughter found me. This food is for you both." Still no response. Leary moved to her mother's side and gently touched her arm. "Mom, please, food, warm." Slowly, with visible effort, the woman raised her head, Her eyes, larger and more luminous than her daughter's, focused first on Leary, then on the food, and finally on Willie. There was no gratitude in her gaze, no relief, only wariness and exhaustion. "It's okay," Willie said softly. "I'm not with station security, Aditya. I just want to help." The woman's gaze dropped to the food again. Willie could see her internal struggle, pride versus desperate need. "Please eat," he urged, sliding the container closer to them. "Both of you." Leary looked to her mother for permission. After a long moment, the woman gave an almost imperceptible nod. That was enough. Leary quickly opened the container, and the small compartment filled with the aroma of hot soup. She helped her mother take the first sip, holding the container, steady for her. Willie watched as the woman's expression softened slightly at the warmth spreading through her body. It was the first hint that a living, feeling being still existed beneath that shell of resignation. "I'll leave you to eat in peace," Willie said, rising to his feet. "But I'll come back tomorrow, with more food." As he turned to go, he felt a tug on his pant leg. Leary was looking up at him, her eyes shimmering with what he recognized as the Lenari equivalent of tears. "Thank you, Will lie," she said in Standard, then switched to her native tongue to add something musical and heartfelt. Though he couldn't understand the words, the sentiment needed no translation. That night, in the solitude of his small station apartment, Willie found himself unable to sleep. The image of the Lenari woman's defeated posture haunted him. How long had they been hiding in that storage compartment? How had they ended up there? Lenari were not common in this sector. They typically stayed closer to the galactic core, where their colonies thrived. He knew the official stance. Refugees without proper documentation were to be reported immediately. The penalty for harboring undocumented aliens was severe: loss of station residency at minimum, criminal charges at worst. Yet, something deeper than legal concerns troubled him. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to care about anyone else's problems. After the disaster on Proxima Station, where his attempt to mediate between warring factions had resulted in casualties he still blamed himself for, he'd retreated into a carefully constructed shell of indifference. "Just one time," he murmured to himself, "just until they're back on their feet. Then I'm done." The next morning, Willie arrived at his usual spot earlier than normal, carrying a bag containing more food and some clean clothing he thought might fit them. He waited, sipping his tea, watching for Leary. She didn't come. By midday, concern had replaced annoyance. Had they been discovered, relocated, or worse, had he somehow made their situation more precarious by interfering? Unable to contain his worry any longer, Willie made his way through the market toward the storage compartment. He moved cautiously, hyper-aware of the security drones and cameras monitoring the corridors. When he reached the peripheral zone, he was relieved to find the storage compartment door still appearing outwardly secured. He hesitated, unsure how to signal his presence without potentially exposing them. After a moment's consideration, he tapped softly on the panel in a rhythm that mimicked Leary's trilling sound from the day before. Silence. He tried again, a little louder. The door slid open just enough to reveal Leary's face. Her expression brightened momentarily upon seeing him, then immediately clouded with worry. "Not safe," she whispered. "Drones came, searching." Willie nodded in understanding. "I brought more food, and some clothes." Leary glanced behind her, then opened the door wider. "Quick!" Inside, the woman, Leary's mother, sat exactly as she had the day before, still and silent. The empty food containers had been meticulously cleaned and stacked in a corner. "Hello again," Willie said, setting down his bag. "I hope you both managed to get some rest." The woman's eyes tracked his movements, but she remained mute. Her silence was so complete, so deliberate, that Willie began to wonder if she was physically unable to speak. "My mom, Rava," Leary said, noticing his questioning glance. No talk. Long time." Willie nodded, understanding dawning. "That's okay, she doesn't need to speak." He unpacked the food. More soup, bread, and some fresh fruit he'd splurged on. The Lenari had a particular fondness for sweet flavors, if he remembered correctly from his translator training. As Leary arranged the meal, Willie discreetly assessed their situation. The compartment showed signs of longer habitation than he'd initially thought. Small, personal items, carefully arranged. Makeshift washing facilities fashioned from discarded containers. Even a crude attempt at insulation against the compartment's cold metal walls. They had been here for weeks, possibly months. "Leary," he asked gently, "how long have you and your mother been on Kesson Station?" The girl paused, her brow furrowing as she calculated. 317 cycles, she finally answered. Willie converted the number in his head. Almost a standard Earth year. And in this compartment, 86 cycles, before different place, but humans found. Said move or report. The casual cruelty of the ultimatum made Willie's stomach tighten. And before Kesson, where was home? Leary glanced at her mother, who had gone very still. Lenari Colony World, Argesta. Gone now. Willie knew of Argesta. The small Lenari settlement had been caught in the crossfire of territorial disputes between two larger powers. Official reports listed it as evacuated, but rumors suggested a darker fate. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Leary shrugged with a wisdom beyond her years. "Many sorry. Sorry not help." Her mother suddenly reached out, placing a hand on Leary's arm. Though she didn't speak, the gesture clearly communicated a desire for the girl to stop sharing their history. Willie respected the boundary. "You're right, Leary. Sorry doesn't help. But maybe I can, in small ways." He gestured to the food. "Please, eat while it's warm." As they ate, Willie explained that he would continue to bring supplies. He gave them a small communicator, an older model, unlikely to be tracked by station security, and showed Leary how to send a simple alert if they were in danger. "I'll come when I can," he promised. "Every day or two. If you need anything urgent, use this. But only in emergencies." Leary nodded solemnly, clutching the communicator as if it were a lifeline. As Willie prepared to leave, he noticed something unusual. A small piece of paper tucked half-hidden beneath one of the thermal blankets. Paper was an extreme rarity on space stations. Everything was digital or holographic. Leary followed his gaze and quickly retrieved the paper. She hesitated, then held it out to him. "For you," she said. "Thank you." Willie accepted the gift with appropriate gravity. It was a drawing, childish but heartfelt, of three figures: a tall human male, a Lenari woman, and a small Lenari girl, all holding hands. Above them, written in careful standard letters, "Family?" The question mark pierced something in Willie's chest. He carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his pocket. "Thank you, Leary," he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "I'll see you soon." The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Every other day, Willie would bring supplies, food, clothing, basic medicines, and occasionally small luxuries like real fruit or reading materials. Leary would greet him with increasing enthusiasm, while Rava maintained her silent vigil, acknowledging his presence only with brief eye contact. He learned more about them through Leary's fragmented stories. Rava had been a voice weaver, a prestigious position in Lenari society, something between a singer, historian, and spiritual leader. Her husband, Vaughn, had been a navigator on an interstellar vessel. When the troubles on Argesta began, he had arranged for Rava and Leary to escape, promising to follow on the next transport. He never arrived. After that, Rava stopped speaking entirely, stopped singing, stopped being anything but a shell moving through space with her daughter. She sings in sleep, Leary confided one day. Small sounds, sad sounds, then wakes, cries no sound. Willie found himself thinking about them constantly. His carefully cultivated detachment was crumbling, replaced by genuine concern for their welfare. He began researching refugee assistance programs, only to discover that recent policy changes had made it nearly impossible for Lenari to qualify. The political climate had grown increasingly hostile. Anti-alien sentiment had risen sharply, following a series of economic downturns, with the Lenari bearing the brunt of public antipathy due to their distinctive appearance and cultural practices. The ban on singing, ostensibly implemented as a noise control measure, was just one manifestation of the broader discrimination. One evening, as Willie made his way to their hiding place, he noticed increased security presence throughout the market. Drones were conducting more thorough scans, and uniformed officers were checking identification with unusual diligence. A cold knot of fear formed in his stomach. Had they been discovered? He altered his route, taking a more circuitous path through maintenance corridors to avoid detection. When he finally reached the storage compartment, he found the door sealed, not just closed, but physically secured with an external lock that hadn't been there before. Panic surged through him. He was about to risk using the communicator when he noticed a tiny slip of paper protruding from a crack near the floor. He retrieved it carefully. Written in Leary's now familiar handwriting, "Safety check. Return night cycle." Relief flooded through him. Station security frequently conducted random safety inspections of peripheral zones. They were looking for structural issues, not hidden refugees. Still, it meant Leary and Rava had to temporarily abandon their shelter. Willie returned during the night cycle, when station lighting dimmed to simulate evening and security patrols were at their minimum. The external lock had been removed, and the door opened at his touch. Inside, he found Leary alone, arranging their few possessions. "Where's your mother?" he asked, alarm returning. "Water pipes," Leary explained. "Washing." The communal washing facilities were located at the far end of the peripheral zone, a risky venture, but necessary for basic hygiene. As Willie helped Leary organize their supplies, he noticed something new among their possessions, a small, smooth stone with swirling patterns etched into its surface. "Lenari memory stone," Leary explained, seeing his interest. "Mom has Vaughn's voice inside?" "His voice?" Leary nodded. "Lenari stones hold sounds. Special ones hold voices of loved ones. Mom listens sometimes. When thinks I sleep." The door slid open, and Rava entered. Her hair was damp, and she wore the clean clothes Willie had brought the previous week. For a moment, with her posture straighter and her skin gleaming with moisture, he caught a glimpse of what she must have looked like before, dignified, beautiful in the alien way of her species. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she held his gaze without wariness. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. It wasn't much, but to Willie, it felt like a breakthrough. That night, as he lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, Willie made a decision. This half-existence, bringing supplies, offering temporary comfort, wasn't enough. They deserved more than a cold storage compartment and constant fear of discovery. The next morning, he visited the station's administrative offices. As a former diplomatic translator with an impeccable service record, he still had some connections, some respected status. He inquired about alien sponsorship programs, a rarely used provision that allowed station residents to formally vouch for and support non-citizens. The clerk eyed him suspiciously. Sponsorship requires significant financial commitment, Mr. Harrison, and considerable paperwork. May I ask which species you're inquiring about? Willie hesitated only briefly. Linari. The clerk's expression hardened. Linari sponsorship applications have a current processing time of approximately 16 months and a rejection rate of 87%. I understand. I'd still like the forms. Your choice, the clerk said with a shrug, transferring the documents to Willie's tablet. But I wouldn't get your hopes up, or theirs. Undeterred, Willie spent the next several days carefully completing the application, drawing on his knowledge of bureaucratic language to frame the case in the most favorable terms possible. He didn't mention Rava and Leary by name. Not yet. First, he needed to establish the theoretical possibility before risking their exposure. During his regular visits, he began subtly preparing them for the idea. He brought educational materials for Leary, helping improve her standard language skills. For Rava, he included information about potential employment opportunities that might suit a former voice weaver, cultural archive work, perhaps, or educational programming. Leary embraced these materials eagerly, her quick mind absorbing new concepts with remarkable speed. Rava's response was more difficult to gauge. She would accept the tablets Willie brought, review the information with apparent interest, but never indicate whether she found any of it viable or appealing. Her continued silence frustrated Willie at times, though he was careful not to show it. How could he help someone who wouldn't, or couldn't, communicate her needs or desires? Then, one day, he arrived to find another piece of paper waiting for him. Unlike Leary's childish drawings, this was covered in flowing Linari script, elegant, musical notation interspersed with text. "Mom right," Leary explained proudly. "For you." "Can you translate it?" Willie asked, staring at the beautiful but incomprehensible symbols. Leary studied the page, her expression growing solemn. "Says, the kindness of strangers is a light in darkness, but light also exposes what hides. Careful of shadows we cast on you." A warning, then. Rava was concerned that their association with him might put him in danger. She wasn't wrong. Harboring undocumented aliens carried severe penalties. But the fact that she cared enough to warn him suggested something important. She wasn't as detached as she appeared. "Tell your mother I understand the risks," Willie said, "and I accept them." Over the following weeks, these paper messages became their primary mode of communication. Rava would write, Leary would translate, and Willie would respond verbally. It was cumbersome but effective. Through these exchanges, he learned more about their life on Argesta, about Linari culture, about Rava's work as a voice weaver. She had been responsible for preserving historical records through complex sung patterns, an art form dating back thousands of years. The no-singing law in Kesson Station wasn't just an inconvenience for her. It was the forced suppression of her entire identity. "For Linari, voice is self," Leary explained one day. "No voice, no self." Willie began to understand the depth of Rava's silence. It wasn't just grief over her lost husband or fear of detection. It was a profound form of self-erasure, a surrender so complete that she had willingly extinguished the core of her being, rather than risk even the smallest sound. The realization strengthened his resolve. When his initial sponsorship inquiry received a surprisingly prompt response requesting more information, he took it as a positive sign. Perhaps his former status carried more weight than the clerk had implied. He began searching for suitable accommodation, somewhere small but private, away from the busiest sections of the station but not so isolated as to draw attention. He found a modest one-bedroom unit in a predominantly human residential zone. The rent was higher than he'd hoped, cutting deeply into his savings. But it had one feature that made it perfect: a small, artificial garden space attached to the common area, where residents could grow plants and herbs. For a species as connected to living things as the Lanari, this would be a precious luxury. When he told Leary about the potential new home, her excitement was tempered with disbelief. Real home with door and growing things? If all goes well with the sponsorship application, Willie cautioned. It's not certain yet. That evening, he received another paper note from Rava. This one simply read, "Why?" Such a small word for such an enormous question. Willie considered it carefully before responding. Because it's the right thing to do. Because no one should live in fear. Because Leary deserves a chance at a normal life. All true, but not the whole truth. The complete answer was more complicated, involving his own loneliness, his guilt over past failures, and something else, something he wasn't quite ready to name, even to himself. The next day, he arrived with something special, a small data crystal containing recordings of traditional Lanari hymns. Such materials were technically legal to possess, though public performance remained prohibited. For private use only, he explained as he handed it to Leary. When you're alone, to remember. Leary's eyes widened. She clutched the crystal reverently, then showed it to her mother. For the first time, Willie saw a genuine emotional response from Rava. Her hands trembled as she took the crystal, her large eyes filling with silvery moisture. She closed her fingers around it and pressed it to her chest, just over her heart. In that moment, something shifted between them. A barrier, invisible but ever-present, dissolved. Rava reached out and touched Willie's hand briefly, her cool fingers lingering just long enough to convey profound gratitude. That night, a notification appeared on Willie's tablet. His sponsorship application had advanced to the secondary review stage, a crucial hurdle overcome. It wasn't approval, not yet, but it was progress. Feeling hopeful, he made his way to their compartment the next morning with the good news. As he approached, he heard something that stopped him in his tracks, a sound so faint he might have imagined it. A whisper of melody, quickly silenced. He entered to find Leary sitting alone, the data crystal clutched in her hands. "Where's your mother?" he asked. "Getting water," Leary replied, her voice tight with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. She listened to Crystal. Did she like it? Leary's eyes filled with tears. She remembered, made small sound. First time since Vaughn. The significance of this moment wasn't lost on Willie. For a Lanari to break their silence, even in the privacy of their hiding place, represented an enormous risk and an even greater emotional breakthrough. When Rava returned, her demeanor appeared unchanged to casual observation. But Willie noticed subtle differences. Her posture slightly more upright, her movements more deliberate. Something had awakened within her. Days passed, then weeks. The sponsorship application progressed through various administrative stages, each one bringing them closer to the possibility of legitimate residence. Willie found himself investing more and more of his time and resources in preparing for their future, purchasing basic furnishings for the new apartment, researching educational programs for Leary, exploring potential work opportunities that might accommodate Rava's unique situation. He also began taking greater risks, bringing them to his own apartment during off-peak hours so they could enjoy proper showers, comfortable seating, and cooked meals. These visits were carefully timed and brief, but they offered a tantalizing glimpse of what normal life might be like. During one such visit, Willie noticed Leary staring with fascination at a small potted plant on his windowsill, an unremarkable succulent, one of the few living things that could thrive in the artificial environment of the station. "Would you like to touch it?" he offered. Leary approached the plant with reverence, extending one slender finger to gently stroke its fleshy leaf. "On Argesta, many growing things," she said softly, All colors, all singing. Plants don't sing, Willie corrected gently. Leary looked at him with surprise. All things sing. Some sounds humans know here. From across the room, Rava watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. She had been examining Willie's bookshelf, actual physical books, another rarity in space habitats. Her fingers trailed over the spines with delicate appreciation. These quiet moments of shared domesticity affected Willie more deeply than he had anticipated. The simple pleasure of providing a safe, comfortable space for them filled an emptiness he hadn't fully acknowledged. Late one night, the communicator he'd given them activated with a soft chime. Willie was instantly alert, adrenaline surging through his system. This was the emergency signal they'd agreed upon. He rushed to the storage compartment, taking every precaution to avoid detection but moving with urgent speed. When he arrived, he found Leary alone, her face streaked with silvery tears. "Mom gone?" she gasped. "Drones came. Almost found. She led away. Said come back when safe." Willie's mind raced through worst-case scenarios. "How long ago?" 2 hours. Said wait 1 hour, then call if no return. That wasn't good. If Rava had been discovered by security, they would already have her in detention. If she was simply hiding elsewhere in the station, she should have returned by now. "Stay here," Willie instructed. "Lock the door, I'll find her." He began a systematic search of the peripheral zones, moving outward in concentric circles from the storage compartment. The night cycle was well advanced, with most of the station's inhabitants asleep, and the corridors largely deserted. This made it easier to move unobserved, but also meant that Rava would be more conspicuous if spotted by security. After an hour of increasingly desperate searching, he found her. Not in a security detention cell as he'd feared, but huddled in a maintenance crawlspace near the outer hull. The space was barely large enough for her lanky frame, and the temperature this close to the exterior wall was dangerously low for a Lenari. "Rava," he whispered urgently. "It's me. Willie, you're safe now." She emerged slowly, her movement stiff from cold and confinement. In the dim emergency lighting, her skin had taken on a concerning grayish tinge. "Can you walk?" he asked, offering his arm for support. She nodded, but as soon as she tried to stand upright, her legs buckled. Without hesitation, Willie caught her, supporting her weight against his side. "Lean on me," he said. "I'll get you back." The journey was painfully slow. Twice they had to hide from passing security drones, pressing themselves into shadowed recesses until the danger passed. Rava remained utterly silent throughout, but her grip on Willie's arm communicated her fear and gratitude more clearly than words. When they finally reached the storage compartment, Leary flung herself at her mother, embracing her with desperate relief. Willie helped Rava to her makeshift bed, wrapping her in thermal blankets and activating a portable heater he'd brought weeks earlier. "What happened?" he asked Leary, as Rava was clearly in no condition to explain. "Security sweep," Leary said, her voice shaking. "New kind. Thermal scanners. Mom heard them coming, led them away from here." She had deliberately exposed herself to draw attention away from their hiding place, away from her daughter. It was an act of profound courage and selflessness. As Willie prepared a hot beverage from their supplies, he made a decision. This couldn't continue. The risks were too great, the conditions too harsh. Regardless of the sponsorship application status, they needed to move somewhere safer immediately. "Tomorrow," he said firmly. "You're both coming to my apartment. It's not permanent, but it's better than this. We'll figure out the rest as we go." He expected resistance, concerns about increased risk, about jeopardizing his position, about the legality of his proposal. Instead, Rava simply looked at him, her large eyes reflecting the compartment's dim blue light, and inclined her head in acceptance. As he administered to her needs, checking for frostbite, ensuring she drank enough warm liquid, monitoring her temperature, Willie felt something shift in their relationship. The careful distance he'd maintained, the professional detachment he'd clung to, was gone. These weren't just refugees he was helping out of duty or guilt. They were people he cared for deeply. In the early hours of the morning, as Leary finally succumbed to exhaustion and fell asleep against her mother's side, Willie prepared to leave. They had made plans for the morning transfer, timing, route, contingencies if they were separated. As he rose to go, Rava suddenly reached out and caught his hand. Her touch was warmer now, her color improving. She looked up at him with an intensity that held him motionless. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, she whispered a single word. Vaughn. Willie froze, understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. Her first spoken word in nearly a year. The name of her lost husband. He didn't know how to respond, what to say that wouldn't diminish the significance of this moment. So he simply squeezed her hand gently and nodded his understanding. As he made his way back to his apartment, Willie's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. The fact that Rava had chosen to break her silence with her husband's name carried implications he wasn't sure how to interpret. Was it a statement of continued devotion, a symbolic release, a comparison? Whatever her intended meaning. One thing was clear. A profound boundary had been crossed. Rava had taken the first step back toward reclaiming her voice, her identity, herself. The next morning, Willie executed their plan with meticulous care. He arrived at the storage compartment during the busiest period of the market cycle, when the crowds would provide the best cover. He brought with him 2 plain gray cloaks, standard attire for station maintenance workers, and identification badges he'd modified to show blurred images that could pass casual inspection. "Put these on," he instructed. "Keep your heads down if we're separated. Continue to my apartment. Leary knows the way." They moved through the station with practiced nonchalance, maintaining separation but keeping each other in sight. Willie led, clearing the way and watching for security. Leary followed at a distance, her small stature making her less conspicuous. Rava came last, her distinctive height partially disguised by a stooped posture. The journey seemed to stretch endlessly, each security checkpoint and drone scan a moment of heart-stopping tension. But finally, they reached Willie's residential sector, then his corridor, then his door. As it slid shut behind them, the sense of relief was palpable. Leary let out a musical sound of delight, the first truly Lenari vocalization Willie had heard from her, and spun in a small circle, taking in the modest but comfortable space. "Home?" she asked hopefully. "Temporary home," Willie corrected gently. "Until we can move to the new place." Rava stood just inside the doorway, her gaze sweeping across the apartment with careful assessment. Her eyes lingered on small details. Books on shelves, a hand-woven rug from Willie's home colony, the potted plant Leary had admired during their previous visit. Then she looked at Willie, and her mouth moved silently, forming what he recognized as "thank you" in standard English. The next few days established a new routine. Willie continued his regular activities, maintaining appearances while carefully screening his apartment for surveillance devices. Rava and Leary remained inside, exploring their temporary sanctuary with increasing comfort. Willie discovered that Leary had a voracious appetite for learning. She devoured the educational materials he provided, quickly advancing beyond basic language lessons to more complex subjects: mathematics, Earth history, xenobiology. Her questions were insightful, often catching him off guard with their perceptiveness. Rava, meanwhile, began to emerge from her shell in subtle ways. Though she still rarely spoke aloud, she communicated more freely through writing and gesture. She took over certain domestic tasks, preparing meals from their supplies, arranging living spaces with an eye for beauty even amid functionality, creating small, decorative elements from repurposed materials. One evening, Willie returned to find his apartment filled with the soft glow of improvised lamps, light diffusing covers Rava had crafted from thin fabric and wire to create a warmer atmosphere. The effect transformed the utilitarian space into something almost magical. "Mom made pretty," Leary explained, proudly. "Like Lenari Home." The sponsorship application continued its slow progress through the bureaucratic system. Each advancement brought both hope and anxiety. Hope that legitimate status might soon be within reach. Anxiety that increased scrutiny might lead to discovery before approval could be secured. Then came a setback. Willie received notification that the application had been flagged for additional security review, a euphemism for potential rejection. The stated reason was vague: insufficient demonstration of cultural integration potential. In clearer terms, the authorities doubted whether Lenari could truly assimilate into station society. Willie spent that night researching precedents, looking for similar cases where the decision had been successfully appealed. He found few encouraging examples. The political climate had hardened significantly against non-human refugees, particularly those with distinctive cultural practices. When he explained the situation to Rava, her reaction surprised him. Instead of despair, she showed determination. She took the tablet from his hands and began writing rapidly in standard English, not the flowing Lenari script she'd used previously. "I will learn," she wrote, "whatever they require for Leary's future." The next day, she asked Willie to bring her traditional Lenari clothing, not the vibrant ceremonial garments that would draw attention, but the simpler daily attire that reflected their cultural aesthetics while remaining subdued enough for station life. "Are you sure?" he asked, concerned about anything that might make her more identifiable as Lenari. She nodded firmly, then wrote, "Cannot hide forever. Better to be seen as Lenari who adapts than as nothing." Willie understood what she meant. Her silent self-erasure had been a survival strategy, but it wasn't sustainable. To truly build a life here, for herself and for Leary, she needed to reclaim her identity while finding ways to navigate the station's restrictive environment. He managed to locate suitable clothing through a specialist vendor who dealt in multi-species attire. The simple garments, flowing pants, and a tunic in muted blues and grays, were designed to accommodate Lenari physiology while remaining visually compatible with human fashion sensibilities. When Rava changed into these clothes, the transformation was remarkable. Her posture straightened, her movements became more fluid, and something of her essential nature seemed to reawaken. She still didn't sing or speak above a whisper, but her presence filled the room differently, with dignity rather than fear. That evening, as Leary slept, Willie found Rava sitting by the window, looking out at the distant stars visible through the station's exterior viewport. She was holding the data crystal containing the Lenari hymns, turning it slowly in her long fingers. "Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. "Singing." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "The law only prohibits public performance," he said carefully. "Here, in private, you could—" She shook her head, touching her throat with a gesture of regret. "You're afraid the sound would carry?" Another shake. She took up her tablet and wrote, voice rusty, long silence, painful now. Willie hadn't considered the physical implications of her self-imposed silence. Like any complex ability, the Lenari vocal techniques would atrophy without use. Reclaiming her voice would be a process, potentially a difficult one. "If you wanted to try," he said, "I could help, make sure we're not overheard." Rava's expression softened with something like affection mixed with sorrow. She wrote, "Maybe someday." A notification chimed on Willie's tablet. An update on the sponsorship application. With trepidation, he checked the message. Secondary review complete, he read aloud. Proceeding to final authorization pending residential confirmation. They had cleared the most significant hurdle. The mention of residential confirmation meant a physical inspection of the proposed living quarters would be required. The apartment he'd leased, but not yet furnished. We need to move quickly, he told Rava. Get the new place ready for inspection. Over the next few days, Willie split his time between his regular routines, setting up the new apartment and preparing Rava and Leary for the final stages of the process. The residential unit needed to meet specific requirements for alien habitation, certain environmental controls, communication systems with translation capabilities, cultural accommodation spaces. Most of these were easily arranged, if expensive. Willie's savings dwindled rapidly, but he found he didn't mind. The possibility of providing Rava and Leary with legitimate status, with safety and stability, was worth far more than financial security. Leary helped in her own way, creating artwork for the new apartment and learning the exact procedures they would need to follow during the inspection. Her quick mind absorbed the complex regulations with impressive speed. I memorize all rules, she announced proudly. No mistakes. Rava focused on cultural documentation, proving that she understood and could comply with station regulations while maintaining appropriate Lenari traditions. This delicate balance was crucial to the final approval. The night before the scheduled inspection, they gathered in Willie's apartment for a small celebration. He had prepared a special meal incorporating elements of both human and Lenari cuisine, a symbolic gesture of cultural integration. As they ate, Leary chatted excitedly about the future, about school possibilities, about the small garden attached to their new home. Her optimism was infectious, bringing smiles to both adults' faces. After dinner, Willie presented them with gifts. A translator pendant for Leary, designed to help with complex language situations, and for Rava, a small but exquisite instrument, similar to a handheld harp. It was a human instrument, but its tonal qualities resembled Lenari musical traditions. For when you're ready, he said simply. Rava accepted the gift with visible emotion. Her fingers traced the strings lightly, producing a whisper of sound that hung in the air between them. Later, as Leary slept and they prepared for the next day's inspection, Rava took Willie's hand and led him to the window. She pointed to a particular star, bright against the void. Argesta, she whispered, her voice a fragile thing, barely audible, even in the quiet room. It was only the second word he'd heard her speak, the name of her lost home. It's still there, Willie said gently. Even if you can't return. She nodded, her expression complex, grief and acceptance intertwined. Then she did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and removed the Lenari memory stone, the one containing her husband's voice. She held it out to Willie. He shook his head, confused. That's yours. Your connection to Vaughn. She pressed it into his hand and closed his fingers around it. From her tablet, she typed a message. Past is past. You are now. The simple statement contained layers of meaning. Willie wasn't sure he fully understood, or dared to interpret. Before he could respond, she touched his cheek lightly with cool fingers, then turned and went to join Leary in the sleeping area. Willie remained by the window for a long time, the memory stone warm in his palm, his thoughts a confused tangle of hope and uncertainty. The inspection the next day proceeded with unexpected smoothness. The station officials were professional, if not warm, noting the careful preparations with grudging approval. They asked perfunctory questions about cultural integration plans, employment prospects, and community engagement. Willie had coached Rava and Leary thoroughly, and they presented themselves with perfect balance, respectful of station norms while maintaining appropriate cultural dignity. Rava spoke when necessary, her voice soft but clear, each word carefully chosen and precisely pronounced. When the officials departed, promising a final decision within days, the three of them maintained composure until the door closed. Then, Leary burst into motion, dancing around the apartment with unrestrained joy. "We did it! They liked us!" Rava's celebration was more subdued, but no less profound. She stood in the center of what would soon be their legitimate home, her gaze taking in the simple furnishings, the small kitchen area, the separate sleeping spaces, and, most precious, the tiny garden visible through the transparent partition. "Home," she whispered, testing the word, as if it were a new concept. 3 days later, the final approval arrived. The sponsorship was officially granted, with Willie legally recognized as their residential guarantor for a period of 2 standard years, after which they could apply for independent status. They were safe, they were legal, they were home. The transition wasn't immediate or seamless. There were adjustments to make, bureaucratic processes to navigate, cultural differences to reconcile. But with each passing day, their new life took firmer shape. Leary enrolled in the station's educational program, where her quick intelligence and natural curiosity quickly made her a standout student, despite occasional xenophobic attitudes from classmates or even instructors. Willie helped her navigate these challenges, teaching her to recognize the difference between genuine curiosity about her differences and prejudice disguised as interest. Rava found purpose in unexpected ways. Her knowledge of historical preservation techniques, developed during her time as a voice weaver, proved valuable to the station's Cultural Archives department. Though initially hired for part-time consultation, her meticulous work and unique perspective soon made her an indispensable resource. Willie continued his quiet life, but with profound differences. His mornings still began with tea, but now often shared with Leary before she departed for school. His evenings, once spent in solitary reflection, now included helping with homework, discussing archive projects with Rava, or simply enjoying companionable silence as they each pursued their own interests. They maintained separate residences, Willie in his original apartment, Rava and Leary in their new home. But the boundaries between these spaces grew increasingly fluid. He spent many evenings with them, sometimes staying overnight when projects or conversations ran late. They, in turn, visited his apartment for meals or simply for a change of environment. The station's anti-alien sentiment didn't disappear, but with legal status and Willie's sponsorship, Rava and Leary faced it from a position of relative security rather than vulnerable hiding. One evening, several months after the sponsorship approval, Willie arrived at their apartment to find Leary waiting with unusual excitement. "Come quick," she whispered, pulling him inside. "But quiet." She led him to the small garden area, where Rava sat among the growing plants. Her back was to them, and she seemed unaware of their presence. She was singing. The sound was low and hesitant, her voice occasionally catching on certain tones, evidence of the long silence she had endured. But the essential quality of Lenari's song remained. Haunting, multi-layered, seemingly impossible for a single voice to produce. Willie stood transfixed. He had heard recordings of Lenari music before, had studied their vocal techniques during his translator training, but experiencing it in person, especially knowing what it cost Rava to reclaim this part of herself, was entirely different. Leary watched her mother with shining eyes, occasionally joining in with soft harmonies when the melody reached familiar passages. Neither Willie nor Leary announced their presence, allowing Rava this moment of private reclamation. When the song finally ended, she remained still for several heartbeats, then turned to face them. There was no embarrassment in her expression, no shame at being overheard, only a quiet pride and something like peace. "Beautiful," Willie said simply. Rava smiled. a full, genuine expression that transformed her features. "Beginning again," she said. Her voice was stronger now, more confident than he had ever heard it. "Like seeds." She gestured to the small plants growing around her. That night, as they shared a meal together, Leary asked the question that had been forming in her mind for some time. "Willie, when you get married to Mom?" The directness of the question, so reminiscent of their first meeting, startled both adults into momentary silence. "Leary," Rava admonished gently, "not appropriate." But the girl persisted. "Why not? He lives here most times. We are family now." "It's complicated," Willie began, unsure how to explain the delicate nature of their relationship to a child who saw things in simpler terms. "Not complicated," Leary insisted. "You love Mom. Mom loves you. Simple." Rava and Willie exchanged glances, neither confirming nor denying the child's assessment. "Human and Lenari traditions are different," Rava explained to her daughter. "Many steps before marriage." Leary considered this explanation with a skeptical expression. "How many steps already done?" Willie couldn't help but laugh at her persistence. "Quite a few, I suppose." "Then not many left," Leary concluded with satisfaction. "I want sisters soon, or brother." This declaration rendered both adults speechless, though for different reasons. The biological compatibility questions alone would require significant medical consultation, not to mention the cultural and social implications of such a union. Yet, as the evening continued and the conversation moved to other topics, Willie found himself considering Leary's straightforward logic. Their relationship had evolved far beyond sponsor and refugees, beyond even friendship. The exact nature of what existed between him and Rava remained unnamed, but it was real and growing stronger with each passing day. Later, as Leary slept and they sat together in the small garden, watching the carefully cultivated plants reach toward the artificial light, Rava finally addressed the question that had hung between them. "She sees with child's eyes," she said softly. "Simple, clear." "Children often do," Willie agreed. "You regret helping us?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "It's the best decision I ever made." Rava was silent for a moment, her gaze on the stars, visible through the station's exterior viewport. "I sing now. Because safe, because—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because heart no longer frozen." She turned to face him fully, her large eyes reflecting the garden's soft illumination. "You gave this safety, home." A pause. "Hope." Willie felt something shift between them, a final barrier dissolving, a possibility opening. "We gave each other these things," he said quietly. She nodded, understanding. Then, with deliberate movement, she reached for his hand and placed it over her heart, a profoundly intimate gesture in Lenari culture, signifying trust without reservation. "Future uncertain," she said. "But together, perhaps." It wasn't a declaration of love in human terms, nor a proposal in Lenari tradition. It was something uniquely their own, a recognition of the bond that had formed between them, unexpected and unplanned, yet no less real for its unusual origins. "Together," Willie agreed, covering her hand with his own. From the doorway came a small, satisfied sound. Leary stood watching them, her expression one of absolute certainty that the universe was unfolding exactly as it should. "Family," she stated simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Looking at her, this remarkable child, who had approached a stranger in a crowded market and demanded he marry her mother, Willie felt a surge of affection so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. Perhaps, in her innocent wisdom, she had seen what they had needed before they recognized it themselves. The future would bring challenges, certainly, Cross-species relationships faced scrutiny, even in the most progressive societies. The station's prejudices wouldn't disappear overnight. Their different lifespans, physiologies, and cultural expectations would require ongoing navigation. But as he sat there in the quiet garden, with Rava's hand warm beneath his, and Leary's approving gaze upon them both, Willie knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever came next, they would face it, as they had faced everything since that first, unexpected meeting, together. In the soft light of their small garden, Rava began to hum a gentle melody. Leary joined in, her higher tones weaving through her mother's deeper notes. Willie listened, letting the music wash over him, a sound that had once been forbidden, now filling their home with hope. Home, family, words he had never expected to claim again, now central to his existence. All because a Lenari child had tugged on his sleeve and asked the most unexpected question. "Human, are you single? My mom's really kind. You have to marry her." Sometimes, Willie reflected as the Lenari melody surrounded him. The universe worked in strange and wonderful ways.